The organizers rubbed their eyes in shock as they observed the vacant seats. The Berlin Open final, which was meant to showcase the top tennis players in the world, was taking place in front of a deserted town.
Why?
In the semifinals, a 21-year-old Filipino wildcard who had won over thousands of fans was eliminated. The Filipino diaspora filled the stadium, purchased tickets, and then disappeared, something that no marketing strategy could accomplish. The tennis world is finally realizing the strength of the Filipino fanbase. The WTA is in disbelief, and the organizers are in a panic. June 14, 2026 was the date. Alexandra Isa was meant to be a footnote at the Berlin Open, which was taking place at the Steffi Graf Stadium in Germany. It was anticipated that the 35th ranked wildcard entry would politely withdraw in the first few rounds. Rather, she transformed Berlin's grass courts into her own stage. Quietly, the run started. Isa defeated former Wimbledon semifinals Dana Vekic in the first match of her season, rallying from a 0-40 deficit to win. It was a strong beginning. The kind of outcome that suggested something unique was simmering beneath the surface. However, few could have foreseen what would happen next. World number 2 Alina Rybakina, a former Wimbledon winner who had defeated the world's top players and was regarded as one of the most formidable opponents on grass, met Isa in the round of 16. Isa dominated rather than merely competing. The tennis world was rocked by a 7-5-6-4 triumph. Thousands of fans who had never thought about visiting Berlin suddenly began booking flights, and the Filipino community erupted. Social media was inundated with messages of delight and incredulity. The people who were already in Europe changed their plans. There was an advocate for the diaspora. One fan wrote, "It's the biggest victory of her career." On grass, she recently defeated the world number 2. It's not a drill. It was a momentous occasion for Southeast Asian tennis as well as for Isa. As the first player from the area to advance to a WTA 500 semifinal on grass, she had created history. The tennis community was paying attention. Another upset occurred in the quarterfinals. World number 8 Alina Svitolina, a tour veteran with years of grass expertise and a game designed for the biggest stages, took on Isa. Isa advanced to the semifinals and secured a place in the top 30 in the world with the identical straight sets victory, 6-3, 6-4. With the poise of a player who belonged on the grandest platforms, Isa remarked, "I don't think there's any more pressure on me than there is on her." The stadium was getting full. The excitement was growing. The Filipino supporters, who had previously been dispersed around the stands, were now clearly audible. They raised flags. They donned the national colors. Until their voices failed, they chanted Laban Alex. The organizers noticed, but they were unaware of what was about to happen. The Berlin Open semi-final ticket sales caught the organizers off guard. The figures were illogical. For the semi-finals, they had sold more tickets than the stadium could accommodate. The demand was unheard of, and the explanation was both straightforward and surprising. Alex. The Filipino diaspora had unprecedented levels of mobilization. Fans had flocked to Berlin from all over Europe, including London, Paris, Rome, and Madrid. To watch a 21-year-old Filipino wildcard compete on grass, they traveled hundreds of miles, took time off work, and spent money they didn't have. In a hurry, the organizers added seats. Sections of the stadium that had been closed for years were reopened. To control the throng, they added more security. In a hurriedly organized press conference, a tournament representative said, "It's unlike anything we've ever seen. There is an enormous demand for tickets. We're making every effort to make accommodations for everyone." However, the surprise of the organizers exposed a more profound reality about the tennis establishment. The Filipino diaspora has been undervalued by them. They were about to learn the same lesson that the Australian Open had discovered only a few months prior. Never place a Filipino celebrity on a small port when the community has made the decision to participate. The Steffi Graf Stadium was surrounded by long lines. In an attempt to get a ticket, fans who had traveled as far as Australia, yes, Australia, stood in queue for hours. They wore the national colors, held flags, and shouted Laban Alex until their voices failed. One devotee, a nurse from London, had flown to Berlin and taken 3 days off work just to see Eala perform. Since she was 16, I had been watching her. I never imagined that I would get to see her in person. With tears running down her face, the admirers exclaimed, "This is a dream come true." The media paid attention. The invasion of the Philippines was featured on the front pages of German publications. Cameras were sent by the local news outlets to document the events outside the stadium. The WTA was compelled to recognize the occurrence after first doubting the tournament's attractiveness. But the fans would vanish as soon as they showed up. Equally quick. Instead of being Alex Eala's greatest moment, this semi-final turned into a nightmare. Eala faced a nightmare clash with Linda Neskova, a 20-year-old Czech who had destroyed Eala 62-60 at Indian Wells earlier in the year. She was able to control play from the first ball because to her strong serve, which produced 9 aces and numerous short returns. Throughout the match, Neskova scored 33 winners while Eala battled with her returns due to what appeared to be a shoulder and elbow ailment. 6-2, 6-4, and 1 hour and 9 minutes were the scores. Thousands of people had fallen in love with the fantasy run, but it was now finished. Eala held her head up as she left the Steffi Stadion court, but her face showed the weight of the situation. No Filipino tennis player had ever accomplished what the 21-year-old had. A world number 2 had been defeated by her. She had defeated the 8th-ranked person in the world. She had advanced to the WTA 500 semifinals for the first time. She had assured herself that she would be among the top 30 in the world. Although she had won €99,565 in prize money, the trophy was not hers, and the championship game would take place without her. Instead of hurling objects onto the court or jeering Neskova, the spectators just stood up and cheered, many of them crying. Then, in silence rather than with rage, they left. Thousands of Filipino supporters left the stadium one by one. They had come from Australia, London, Paris, Rome, and Madrid. They had taken a break from their jobs. They had used money they didn't have. They had stood in queue for tickets for hours. They had sung Laban Alex till their voices failed, waved flags, and donned the national colors. Their competition was now over. They concluded that the final was not for them. The organizers took a second look at the empty seats the following day. The world's top tennis players were meant to compete in the Berlin Open final, which was being held in front of a deserted town. On a court that was just a quarter full, Jessica Pegula and Linda Neskova fought for the championship. A-list games had filled the stadiums to capacity, but now there were lone viewers scattered throughout. The tennis world was finally realizing the strength of the Filipino fanbase. The WTA was taken aback, and the organizers were in a panic. In a post-final interview, a tournament official said, "What happened here is unprecedented. We underestimated the impact of Alex Eala's presence." The Filipino community came to watch her, not just to watch tennis. They had no motive to stay after she was eliminated. The story was revealed by the numbers. Within hours following A-list's quarterfinal triumph, the semifinals were sold out. Seats for the final, which was meant to be the main event, had been difficult to fill. Local schools received free tickets and discounts from the organizers. Nothing was effective. The absence of the fans had been communicated. As she observed from the stands, Eala was touched by what she witnessed. She was aware that she had performed poorly in the semifinal, but she would always remember the encouragement she had gotten during the competition. "Berlin, you are so special," she remarked in a social media post. "I'm grateful for everything." The Australian Open, Dubai Open, and Italian Open had all taught the tennis community to never undervalue the Filipino diaspora. They don't just emerge, they do so in quantities that alter the sport's economics, and they vanish as fast as its champion. The competition was completed when the final was played and Jessica Pegula raised the trophy, but no win could change the message conveyed by the empty seats. The sport was only now starting to realize that Alex Eala had evolved from a tennis player to a movement. Instead of being Alex Eala's greatest moment, the semi-final turned into a nightmare. Eala had a terrible clash with Linda Neskova, a 20-year-old Czech who had destroyed her 6,260 in Indian Wells earlier in the year. She was able to control play from the first ball because to her strong serve, which produced 9 aces and numerous short returns. Throughout the match, Neskova scored 33 winners while Eala, who seemed troubled by what appeared to be a shoulder and elbow injury, struggled with her returns. 6-2, 6-4, and 1 hour and 9 minutes were the scores. Thousands of people had fallen in love with the fantasy run, but it was now finished. Eala held her head up as she left the Steffi Stadion court, but her face showed the weight of the situation. No Filipino tennis player had ever accomplished what the 21-year-old had. She had earned €99,565 in prize money, defeated a world number 2, defeated a world number 8, advanced to her maiden WTA 500 semifinal, and ensured her place in the top 30. However, the trophy was not hers, and the final would go place without her. Scattering of courteous applause greeted Jessica Pegula and Linda Noskova as they entered center court at the Steffi Graf Stadion on Sunday afternoon during the Berlin Open final. Just 24 hours before, the stands were brimming with Filipino flags. Now, they were a sea of empty seats. The organizers tried everything to fill the stadium, including giving tickets to nearby schools and offering discounts, but nothing worked. The absence of the Filipino supporters had been communicated. The environment was bizarre for the athletes on the court. In front of a dead town, one of the most prominent events on the women's tennis calendar, the WTA 500 final, was taking place. Eala's triumphs over Rybakina and Svitolina were met with thunderous cheers from the audience, which lingered in the air as a disturbing reminder of what the event had been only days before. No award could change the story that the empty seats conveyed. The fourth-ranked player in the world, Pegula, handled the silence like a seasoned pro. She won her second title of the year by defeating Noskova in straight sets, 64-36. But it was impossible to overlook the crowd's absence, even in victory. The jubilation seemed hollow, the award presentation was short, and the clapping was muted. The WTA was taken aback. The tennis world was finally realizing what the Australian Open, Dubai Open, and Italian Open had already discovered, and the organizers were in a panic. The Filipino diaspora not only follows Alex Eala, but they do so with such fervor that it alters the sport's economics. Stadiums are packed while she competes, but they vanish after she falls. The figures presented a clear image in the days that followed. Within hours of Eala's quarterfinal victory, the semi-final matchup with Noskova was sold out. Even half of the seats were not filled for the final, which was meant to be the main event. The strength of the Filipino fanbase was underestimated by the organizers. The final was supposed to sell itself, they had thought. They had been mistaken. As she observed from the stands, Eala was touched by what she witnessed. No Filipino tennis player had ever accomplished what the 21-year-old had. She had advanced to her first WTA 500 semifinal, defeated a world number 2, and defeated a world number 8. When the official WTA rankings were announced on Monday, she was expected to move up 5 spots to a career-best world number 30, guaranteeing herself a place in the top 30. Despite receiving €57,395 in prize money, she did not receive the trophy, and the final was held without her. She added, "Can't begin to describe all the emotions I've experienced this week," in a social media post. "My heart is overflowing. Berlin, you have my eternal gratitude. You are truly unique. I'm grateful." The sentiment was deep, but the words were straightforward. She had taught Berlin a lesson it would never forget, and Berlin had given her a moment she would never forget. The Filipino diaspora doesn't simply show up, they show up in large enough numbers to alter the sport's economics, as the tennis community has discovered. And they vanish as fast as their champion. The competition was completed when the final was played and Jessica Pegula raised the trophy, but no win could change the message conveyed by the empty seats. The tennis community was only starting to realize that Alex Eala had evolved from a player to a movement. A ghost town served as the backdrop for the Berlin Open final. The organizers rubbed their eyes in shock as they observed the vacant seats. The event, which was meant to highlight the top tennis players in the world, turned into a sobering lesson of what happens when you undervalue the influence of the Filipino fanbase. Thousands of people have fallen in love with 21-year-old wildcard Alex Eala. She had advanced to her first WTA 500 semifinal, defeated a world number 2, and defeated a world number 8. When the official WTA rankings were announced on Monday, she was expected to move up 5 spots to a career-best world number 30, guaranteeing herself a place in the top 30. Despite receiving €57,395 in prize money, she did not receive the trophy, and the final was held without her. She added, "Can't begin to describe all the emotions I've experienced this week," in a social media post. "My heart is overflowing. Berlin, you have my eternal gratitude. You are truly unique. I'm grateful." The sentiment was deep, but the words were straightforward. She had taught Berlin a lesson it would never forget, and Berlin had given her a moment she would never forget. The Filipino diaspora doesn't simply show up, they show up in large enough numbers to alter the sport's economics, as the tennis community has discovered. And they vanished as fast as their champion. The competition was completed when the final was played and Jessica Pegula raised the trophy, but no win could change the message conveyed by the empty seats. The tennis community was only starting to realize that Alex Eala had evolved from a player to a movement. After what transpired in Berlin, do you believe the WTA and tournament organizers will begin to focus more on the Filipino diaspora? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Additionally, Alex Eala's narrative is far from finished, so click the subscribe button if you want to know the true story behind every sporting triumph, heartache, and movement.